Hello fellow Hunters of the Blue and welcome to my channel. Today is a very special day because today we start the series Heavy Metal Marines. It's a series in which I will try to paint a space marine using contrast paints plus highlights and try to get it as close as possible to the heavy metal paint jobs. So come on with me in this quite special journey. In this first episode I'm going to paint this white scar. So let's get cracking. So for our first step, we are starting from a Corax white spray base, and I'm going to just apply Apothecary white contrast all over. What I like to do is work in panels and also work the brush in the direction that I want the shadows to be. Like that. So as I want the shadows in the lower parts of the leg, I move the brush from up to down, like so. So more contrast paint gathers in the lower parts. Keep doing this all over the model. So our Apothecary white is now completely dry, and if you made some mistakes or the contrast paint has pulled too much where you don't want it, for example on the top of his head here, I really don't like that much paint there, it looks really bad. Also a bit on his arm here, I really don't like that either. I like it down there is really nice, but up there I didn't saw that, also didn't saw this one. If you want to fix it, it's really easy. What I do is take a heavy glaze of full and grey. What I mean by a heavy glaze is super thin. I'm pulling the paint where I want it to be. So upwards in this case. Our corrections with full and grey are done, and you can see there is a substantial difference there. And now I'm going to add a bit more shading to the model because ironically I think Apothecary white lacks a bit of contrast. I'm going to do a simple panel lining using Griff Charger Grey and apply this into all the recesses and panel lines of the armor. It flows really well, it's a really nice paint this, and has a slight blue tone that matches really well with the white. There are no tricks here, sadly. You better be prepared for a long time doing this. But trust me, the results are well worth it. Also, you don't need to be too neat, especially because we are going to do an edge highlight. So we really don't need the perfect clean edges because we're going to go over them with white. So if you make a small mistake and go over the edge a bit, it really doesn't matter. So as you can see, I have all the panel lining done, and it's done an amazing job bringing out all the detail in the armor. I haven't cared one bit about all the red parts and all the leather and all the rubbery black parts. I'm going to do them over. I just wanted to do this the best I can because this is the most important color, and then I will go and repaint all the areas that needed repainting with my base Corax white. So now I'm going to highlight the armor, and from that I'm using a straight white. If you want to hear me rambling about white, go watch the video here. But for all of you that already know me, you know I'm using white ink. This is from Daler-Rowney. It's the most amazing white you will ever use. You can already see how nicely it flows off the brush. No effort at all. Flows super nice. I'm just going to edge highlight all the armor. This again, there's no real tricks to it. You just have to do it. So on top of the edge highlighting, I'm going to do a glaze of white and apply a highlight over the unrounded parts on the top. I'm moving my brush and trying to give enough paint there. And I quickly clean my brush and feather in the highlights, like so. Super easy. So again, here I'm pushing the paint towards the point that I want it to be. Then clean my brush and smooth out the transition. I will after that add another layer, creating a small dot of white. So, as you can see, our highlights are finally done, and it took quite a while. And now I'm going to move into the black rubbery parts in the joint. For this, as you can see, I already applied the Griff Charger Grey intentionally all over the parts because I want to use that darker color as the underlying paint for the Black Templar contrast paint. That way, we'll get immediately a much darker and richer black. Black that will also have a slight tint of blue that will help us blend it all in. Just apply the black contrast paint all over the joints. So now all our Black Templar contrast paint is applied. Now I'm going to highlight all that areas, and for that I'm using a 50-50 mix of Thunderhawk Blue and Fenrisian Grey. Just apply it on the folds of the rubbery parts. This is the part you really need to be careful not to mess up too much. It's not a big deal if you do, just go back to the edge highlights, because that's probably what you will mess up. Once that highlight of 50-50 mix of Thunderhawk Blue and Fenrisian Grey is dry, we now move into pure Fenrisian Grey and just cover a smaller area than you did previously. Concentrating the parts that you think light will hit. Like for example, just here, accompanying the highlight we did in his leg. Our highlight of recent grey is now dry, and I'm going to do the last one using Ulthuan Grey. This would be just a very small dot. Like so. And you can see how much difference that makes, creating a very nice effect. Our black parts are now finished. I'm going to move on to the red. And first of all, I need to clean up all this mess and all the shoulder trims. So what I'm going to do is base coat all those parts using Wraithbone. Again, as with everything contrast paint, you need to be very careful not to mess up your previous work, because cleaning up and fixing mistakes is a bit harder than with normal paints. So as you can see, I have my Wraithbone applied in all the parts that will be red. And while I was at it, I also painted with Corax White all the parts that are going to be other colors, like the Purity Seal, his leather belt, and leather pouches. But I left his eyes intentionally because I want to show you how I did it. So be very careful. You have a very dark line, so just paint inside it. Doesn't really matter, you don't have to get this perfect, but like so. We just want a lighter color inside, so we can apply our contrast paints later. So with all our colors blocked in for the contrast paints, I'm going to start with the red. For this I'm using Blood Angels Red. I'm just applying it straight out of the pot over all the areas that I want to be red. Now that our red is base coated basically, I'm going to add a bit of interest and depth to certain parts using Flesh Tearers Red. So I'm just going to focus on this section of the shoulder pads. And I also going to provide a bit of shading and depth into the eagle. I apply it. As you can see, I apply the red, clean my brush, and feather it out. Now our red is completely shaded. I'm going to move to an edge highlight, and for this I'm going to use Wild Rider Red. In the shoulder pads, use the side of your brush for an easy edge highlight, and for the symbol in his chest, I'm just going to highlight the most raised edges. Our Wild Rider Red is now dry, and I'm going to move to the next highlight. This is going to be Best Igor Flesh, and I'm going to apply this in the exact same way, but in a smaller area. we have our highlights of plastic or flesh now done, and I'm going to do a dot highlight using Angor flesh. It's going to go to the corners. This is super fine. And the same on the other side. So with our red parts now finished, I'm going to move into the final details. And I'm going to start with the eye lenses. And for this, the first step is a slight glaze with Talazar blue. We don't want this to pull at all, we just want a nice even coverage of the islands. With the Talazar blue now dry, I'm going to start applying the shades, and for this I'm going to use ultramarine blue and apply it to the back of the islands, like that. And now for the final shade, I'm going to do black temper just to the very back. With our contrast paints now dry, I'm going to do the first highlight. For this I'm using Baharov blue. Be very careful. I will also use Baharov blue to apply a small dot to the back of the lens in the darkest part. Now I'm using Blue Horror to add yet another highlight to the front part. And now I take white and try to do a small dot, smaller than the previous Baharov blue dot. So now it's time to move on to his leather. And we are going to do a mix of 2 parts Cygor brown with 1 part medium, and just apply it all over his pouches and his belt. While the Cygor brown dries, I'm going to apply a skeleton horde over the parchment of his purity seal. So, with the Cygor brown dry, it's now time to highlight all the leather. From that I'm using Gorthor brown, and I'm just going to do an edge highlight on all the leather parts. This can be a bit chunky if you want, because we are going to do more highlights later, so it doesn't really matter. Our Gorthor brown is now dry, and I'm moving to Baneblade brown for the next highlight. Basically, I'm going to do the same edge highlight, but try to do it thinner, so a bit of the Gorthor brown shows in between the Cygor brown and this highlight. With the highlight of Baneblade brown finished, I'm going to do the final highlight, which is a dot highlight using Karak stone. I'm literally just doing this in the most exposed corners. With our leather now finished, I'm going to move into the purity seal, and first of all I'm going to do a recessed shade with Fire's Layer Flesh. Our Fire's Layer Flesh is now dry, and I'm going to highlight the parchment paper using the Screaming Skull. I'm doing this going to the lines, of course, but also if I fail I want more light. I'm going to be more aggressive with this towards the bottom and lighter towards the top. And of course I'm going to edge highlight all of it. With the highlights of Screaming Skull done, I'm going to move into Palette Witch Flesh, and I'm just going to do basically the same, but more concentrated in just the areas I want to be more highlighted. For last highlight on the parchment paper, I'm going to use white and just going to do dots in the most raised and prominent areas of the folds. With that last highlight, the parchment paper of the purity seal is finished, and I'm going to do now the wax seal. For that I'm using Volupus Pink, straight out of the pot, and apply it just over the purity seal. Very careful when you meet the white, of course, but this is very straightforward. While the Volupus Pink dries, I'm going to move on to the text of the parchment paper, and for this I'm using Cygor Brown. I mix it with a bit of water just so it flows nicely. And I'm going to do random assortment of lines and squiggles very carefully. Now I only need to do the highlights on the wax paper, and from that I'm starting with Pink Horror. And just do small dots of highlight there. For our next highlight I'm going to mix 50-50 of Ushabti Bone and Pink Horror. When that highlight finished, I'm going to use pure Ushabti Bone and do a couple of dots. As small as you can. With the purity seal now done, this is basically almost all the model done. We only have left to paint his Auspex and his bolter, and this is almost all metal. So what I'm going to do is base coat all the metal parts using Iron Breaker. So now I have all the rest of the model base coated. As you can see, I did, as I said, Iron Breaker on the metal parts, and I base coated with black the casing of the bolter. Now I'm going to wash all the metallics using Black Templar mixed with Contrast Medium. It's 1 part Black Templar, 4 parts Contrast Medium. I find this works extraordinarily well as a wash. Our wash of Black Templar is now dry, and you can see What a really nice effect it has. This wash has substituted Nun oil for me for regular metallics. As you can see, I hope you can see what a nice effect it does. Nun oil doesn't dry as smooth as this does. This is truly something else. And now I'm just going to edge highlight all the metallic parts using a Stonehouse silver. Our highlights on the metal are now done, and I'm going to show you how to paint the Auspex screen. I'm going to try to zoom in as much as I can so you can see it as good as possible. And we start with Yanden Yellow. This is Coras White, of course. I'm just going to lay Yanden Yellow in there. I'm not worrying if the yellow goes into the metal, because that will help create a bit of an OSL effect. And I'm going to I just want a slight tint of yellow, so I'm going to take almost all of it with my brush. So it's just a very nice uniform layer of Yanden Yellow in there. Our Yanden Yellow is now dry, and I'm going to do the same with Warp Lightning. Just apply a coat. I'm going to, I don't mind again if it touches a bit of the edges, but I want it mostly inside there. Our warp lining is now dry, and I'm going to apply another coat, but I'm going to do it just on the bottom side, and then immediately I'm going to clean my brush and feather it out. You're going to see it now. So apply generous amount. Like that. Our second coat of warp lining is dry. I'm going to do a glaze on the bottom part with Dark Angel's Green. Again, I will probably feather this out so it blends better. With our contrast paints now dry, I'm going to start drawing the freehand that's usually in the Auspex screen. So with Mood Green, I'm going to draw a line. Like so. And I'm going to do a couple of dots here and there. And I'm also going to try and do a highlight on the screen. And I'm going, for the final highlight, I'm going to use Dawn Yellow and just do a very small line. On the top. So with that last step done, the model is finished and looking quite amazing. I had so much fun painting this. The only step you haven't seen is his bolter casing, and the only reason I didn't show you is because I already did a video on painting black, and I felt it was unnecessary to do another video which would be exactly the same. So if you want to see how I painted his bolter, go check this video. So as I said, I really hope you liked this video. It was quite a challenge to make such a long video with all the steps, and I really hope you found it useful. I'll catch you in the next one. Bye.